morning. I'm Earl Raab, and I'm standing here next to Michael Feinstein, who is one of the country's most wildly acclaimed cabaret singers and pianists. He's currently appearing at the Plush Room in San Francisco. Our subject today is American Jewish songwriters, which happily Michael will mainly explore by way of illustration. The first being a song, Properly Enough, by George and Ira Gershwin.
If I'm in a daze, I am not to blame. Having heard your praise, I'll never be the same. When at last fate brings someone you adore, and she tells you things, who could ask for more? There really is a Santa Claus, my dear, I'm sure there is, because it's wonderful, it's marvelous, you should care for me. It's awful nice, it's paradise, it's what I love to see. You've made my life so glamorous, you can't blame me for feeling amorous. Oh, it's wonderful, it's marvelous that you should care for me. It's wonderful, it's marvelous, you should care for me. It's elegant, it's what I want, it's what I need to see. But oh, what's all this dizziness? I thought that I came here on business. It's wonderful, it's marvelous that you should care for me. Oh dear, I feel so tingling, I'll even overlook your English. It's exceptional, snow bagatelle, that you should care for me, that you should care for me.
Michael, you actually worked for Ira Gershwin, who wrote those wonderful rhymes in there, didn't you?
Yes, I was very lucky. It's an amazing story, how I met Ira. I, by accident, met June Levant, Oscar Levant's widow, and of course Oscar Levant was a close friend of George and Ira Gershwin's. And this was shortly after I moved to California. And having met June through a long series of coincidences, which are it would take up the whole program to tell you that, but she took a liking to me and introduced me to Ira Gershwin after some maneuvering, because Ira was bedridden and didn't see too many people. But something happened that made him interested in me, and I ended up spending 6 years working with him, cataloging his archive, and was kind of a companion to him. And in the process, learned a lot about American songs, theater songs, and Jewish songwriters. Ira was always introducing me to many of his songwriting colleagues, and taught me a great deal about the background of this material.
Ira worked with, he also worked with Kurt Weill, didn't he?
Yes, well, Ira first collaborated with George, but after his brother died suddenly in 1937, he was only 38 years old. Ira retired for a couple of years, then he started to work with Kurt Weill. Kurt Weill had asked Ira to work with him earlier in the mid-30s, but Ira was, of course, working with George. But in 1940, they collaborated on Lady in the Dark, which was a groundbreaking musical drama because it was about psychoanalysis, and it was a straight play with suddenly these incredible dream sequences. And the leitmotif of the show was this theme that's heard all the way through. And in the end of the show, Gertrude Lawrence, at the end of her psychoanalysis, realizes what this song is. And I'll play this song for you. My ship has sails that are made of silk. The decks are trimmed with gold, and of jam and spice there's a paradise in Lowell. My ship's aglow with a million pearls, and rubies fill each bin. The sun sits high in a sapphire sky when my ship comes in. I can wait the years till it appears, one fine day, one spring. But the pearls and such, they won't mean much if there's missing just one thing. I do not care if that day arrives. That dream need never be. If the ship I sing doesn't also bring my own true love to thee. If the ship I sing doesn't also bring my own true love to me.
I guess that's recognizably Kurt Weill.
Yes. Well, Kurt Weill's style, that's hard to say. Kurt Weill's style changed when he came to the United States in 1935. He was the son of a cantor, incidentally. And the interesting thing about a lot of these songwriters, these great songwriters, is that many of them had fathers who were cantors or were very much involved in Jewish music. And the other interesting thing about them is that they, for the most part, were not very religious, but of course observed, were always Jews and always considered themselves Jews, but didn't go to temple particularly much.
This was the period of the second generation when a lot of that was happening before the third generation came back.
Yes,
that's the way it's supposed to work.
Yes.
You know, one gets the impression from, in general, and from hearing the authors that you're singing, that while about, I guess, at the most, Jews have been about 5% of the population in this country, at least half of the popular songwriters have been Jewish. Does that make sense?
At least half, yes, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons for that is that songwriting was a profession in which Jewish people could get into rather easily without problems of prejudice, because there were a few pioneer songwriters, Monroe Rosenfeld, who was a great songwriter in the 1800s and early 1900s, and Charles K. Harris, who wrote the first million-selling song, After the Ball, which actually sold about 3 million copies. And it paved the way for a lot of these other fellows. And also the producers of theater at that time were Jewish. The vaudeville stars, the greatest vaudeville stars, were Jewish. I mean, we had Al Jolson, Sophie Tucker, Eddie Cantor. It just went on and on. Belle Baker, who was all but forgotten today.
What about, did you know Rodgers and Hart?
Well, Larry Hart died in 1943, and I never had the opportunity to meet Richard Rodgers, who died in 1979. Happily, through Ira Gershwin, I got to meet such people as Arthur Schwartz and Yip Harburg and Burton Lane and Harold Arlen, who just died earlier this year. And they're an amazing bunch of guys because they all have this this background of either being born and raised in New York or having immigrated to New York.
They did something with New York, didn't they? Rogers and Hart.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah. Well, Rogers and Hart wrote probably the most famous song about New York. And I'll sing it for you now. Okay. Glad you asked about that song. Summer journeys to Niagara and to other places aggravate all our cares. We'll save our fares. I've a cozy little flat in what is known as Old Manhattan. We'll settle down right here in town. We'll have Manhattan, the Bronx and Staten Island too. It's lovely going through the zoo. It's very fancy on old Delancey Street, you know. The subway charms us so when balmy breezes blow to and fro. And tell me what street compares with Mott Street in July. Sweet push carts gently gliding by. The great big city is a wondrous toy made for a girl and boy. We'll turn Manhattan into an Isle of Joy. Here's a less familiar chorus. We'll go to Yonkers, where true love conquers in the wilds. You know, it was a long time ago. And starve together, dear, at Childs. We'll go to Coney and eat bologna on a roll. Through Central Park we'll stroll, where our first kiss we stole, soul to soul. Our future babies we'll take to Abbey's Irish Rose, the longest running play. I hope they live to see it close. The city's clamor can never spoil the dreams of a boy and Goyle. We'll turn Manhattan into an Isle of Joy.
You know, you mentioned, Michael, that in terms of the disproportionate number of Jewish songwriters, you mentioned the cantors in the background, and you mentioned the fact that it's a marginal business, which a lot of Jews had to go into. Mm-hmm. Any relationship to Yiddish music or the Yiddish theater?
Oh, yes, there is. A lot of songwriters denied that they were directly influenced by Yiddish music. But, for example, in the verse of George Gershwin's Swanee, the introduction in the music is... That was a standard introduction played in Jewish music, and a lot of those minor key melodies, you know. The verse of Swanee, I've been away from you a long time. It was that sort of thing. There was a lot of use of Jewish melodies. And one musicologist pointed out that Embraceable You was very similar to a traditional Jewish folk song. So there's definitely a lineage there.
How about Kern and Hammer? As long as we're doing pairs, how about Kern and Hammerstein?
Well, Jerome Kern is the first composer who really wrote music for the theater that was integrated into the plots and into the books of shows. And his first hit was in 1905 or 6, a song called How'd You Like to Spoon With Me? Yet the songs for which we remember Kern start from, let's say, Showboat, 1927, through the mid-40s when he died. And Showboat was an incredible musical because it was the first musical about the South that was not about Mammy and cotton picking and all that stuff, but it was a serious musical about the South, and of course produced a lot of hits with Mr. Hammerstein's wonderful lyrics, including this one. Only make believe I love you. We could make believe that you love me. find peace of mind in pretending. Couldn't I, couldn't you, couldn't we make believe our lips are blending in a phantom kiss, or two or three? You might as well make believe I love you, or to tell the truth, I
The catalog of American Jewish songwriters is so great.
It's so vast, and today, still, the major writers of theater are Jewish. I mean, Stephen Sondheim, Jerry Herman, Burton Lane, Bach and Harnick, Maury Yeston, who recently wrote Nine.
They're a long way from the cantorial tradition now.
A long way, except Stephen Sondheim studied with Oscar Hammerstein. He learned from Oscar Hammerstein. So there is still the lineage. Harold Arlen was a composer whose father was also a cantor. And his family certainly frowned on the fact that he was interested in popular music. That was terrible. But later, after Harold had had hits with very Jewish-sounding songs like Stormy Weather, then his father started to interpolate the melodies of Stormy Weather into his services at his temple in Buffalo. One of the first hits that Arlen had was It's Only a Paper Moon, which he wrote with Yip Harburg, who was a classmate of Ira Gershwin in New York. Yip Harburg's real name was Isidor Hochberg, and he changed it to E.Y. Harburg. Harold Arlen's real name was Hyman Arluck. And together with Billy Rose, they wrote this song. Say it's only a paper moon sailing over a cardboard sea, but it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. Yes, it's only a canvas sky hanging over a muslin tree, but it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. Without your love, it's a honky-tonk parade. Without your love, it's a melody played in a penny arcade. It's a Barnum and Bailey world, just as phony as it can be. But it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me.
The songs that you played generally were known as Tin Pan Alley songs, weren't they?
Yeah, even though all of these songs came out of theater or film, but they crossed over and became Tin Pan Alley hits. All of the songwriters that I seem to be covering are from the 20s and 30s, and were all theater writers. That was an early hit of Arlen and Harburg, and they, of course, went on to write things like Over the Rainbow and Happiness is Just a Thing Called Joe. But most of these songwriters wrote these songs for plots of particular shows.
And who else? What other pair of writers?
Well, there are so many. I mean, there's people like Leonard Bernstein. There's Bernstein wrote with Comden and Green. There's Julie Stein and Sammy Kahn. And there's Burton Lane, who wrote with a lot of people, including Finian's Rainbow with Yip Harburg, and he wrote On a Clear Day with Alan J. Lerner. But Burton Lane is one of the great theater writers, and for a movie he wrote one of my favorite songs, which is also a rather pastoral song about New York. You know, these songs were written a long time ago because they don't write pastoral songs about New York anymore.
I remember Pastoral New York.
This has lyrics by Ralph Freed, who was Arthur Freed's brother. When a girl meets boy, life can be a joy, but the note they end on will depend on little pleasures they may share. So York in June. How about you? I love a Gershwin tune. How about you? I love a fireside when a storm is due. I like potato chips, moonlight, and motor trips. How about you? I'm mad about good books, can't get my fill. And Franklin Roosevelt's looks give me a thrill. Holding hands at the movie show when all the lights are low may not be new, but I like it. How about you? I like Jack Benny's jokes to a degree. I like the common folks. That includes me. I love to window shop on Fifth Avenue. I like banana splits, late supper at the Ritz. How about you? I like to dream of fame. Maybe I'll shine. I'd like to see your name right beside mine. Gee, it seems we're in harmony. Looks like we both agree on what to do, 'cause I like it. How about you? I like it. How about you?
We wouldn't make this credible unless we mentioned Irving Berlin, if we're talking about American Jewish songwriters. But before you swing into that, and we'll end with that, I'd like to thank you very much, Michael Feinstein, for being with us. It zipped by. Michael Feinstein, who is at the Plush Room in San Francisco and one of the great cabaret singers and pianists in the country today, and ending with a little Irving Berlin.
Yes. Irving Berlin, born in 1888, from Teman, Russia. As a child, I got wild when the band played. How I ran to that man when his hands swayed. Clarinets were my pets, and the slide trombone I thought was simply divine. But today, when they play, I could hiss them. Every bar is a jar to my system. But there's one musical instrument that I call mine. I love a piano. I love a piano. I love to hear somebody play on a piano, a grand piano. It simply carries me away. I know a fine way to treat a Steinway. I love to run my fingers over the keys, the ivories, and with the pedal. I love to meddle when Paderewski comes my way. I'm so delighted when I'm invited to hear that long-haired genius play. Well, you can keep your fiddle and your bow, give me a P-I-A-N. Oh, 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 I love to stop right beside an upright or a high-toned baby grand. I love a piano.
ends with a knockout.
Thank you. I'm knocked down.
When did Irving Berlin write that?
He wrote that in 1911. He introduced it for the Friars Club Frolic. Eddie Cantor introduced it in vaudeville. Al Jolson introduced it when he was with Lou Dockstadt as minstrels. Berlin is 98 years old today. Just amazing. And still writing, I hear. So that's very good news for song aficionados such as...
and for people who are approaching 98 years.
Yes, great news for them, yeah.
I'd like to thank you again, Michael Feinstein, who
Thank you.
has been regaling us with stories and tunes from the American Jewish songwriters in the period which we think of as Tin Pan Alley.
Oh, yes.
And are you nostalgic about that?
Yes, I wish I could have been around then, but I'm happy to be here today to sing these songs for contemporary audiences.
Thank you again very much.
Thank you.